So Georgia said, our speaker, Professor Munro, who I don't know, but I know for work, is this year's Kenneth Hale Speaker for the Institute. To say that Kenneth Hale was one of our discipline's brides would not be saying anything new. He opened the door to addressing indigenous languages in the field. He was a linguistic savant, knowing the numerous languages that he could speak. He was a prolific writer and an insatiable researcher. Munro falls in that category of brides for us. And to say that my introducing her is a privilege is a grave, grave understatement. She has thought about, written about, taught, mentored, enacted, incited, worked out, compiled, argued for, maintained, affirmed, validated, held up, an astonishing host of topics within the domain of indigenous languages. Everything from working out all aspects of the grammar for a number of American Indian languages, including Chickasaw, Zapotec, Pima, Gabrielino, Tonga, Lakota, Garifuna, among others, to addressing language families, Muskogean, Uto-Aztecan, Yuman, Zapotecan, to issues in fieldwork and concerns regarding the process of gathering language data. Name it, and Munro has addressed it. This area of language revitalizing is in itself a counter to colonial threats of language erasure. The dismissal of a language or a language variety is the dismissal of a whole group of humans who speak and live their lives via a language or a variety, and the steady efforts to stem language loss emerges from a deep well of conviction that how they speak, what they speak, whether it's formulaic, ritualistic, conversational, written, formal, oral, are the ways in which they know themselves. This kind of intimate identification of self-recognition via very particular and specific sounds, words, phrases, sentences informs the very survival of the group and is the basis for their claiming or reclaiming what is really them. So every cell in Munro's work resonates with this. Her work touches on some of the deepest survivalist chords that run through indigenous communities, and she tackles them head-on, writing openly not just about what she's documenting, but the untidy, messy process of how. In a paper entitled Making a Zapotec Dictionary, she writes openly about some tensions in the compiling process. How should main entries in a dictionary be translated? How should syntactic information be encoded in dictionary entries? How should the language be written? These questions are not trivial and their answers can be unwieldy and sometimes amorphous, but they're crucial for us to raise and ponder as we think about how to document, preserve, and revitalize indigenous languages. What is remarkable about Munro's linguistic scholarship is her attention not just to linguistic forms, agreement, reference, subjecthood, all of which are crucial to her work in syntax, but also to the more human aspects of gathering language data. So get this charming little detail. In a paper on field linguistics, she writes evocatively about how taking her then new baby Alex to her Chickasaw teacher Catherine Wilmont, and how the presence of her baby became helpful in eliciting a speaker to produce diminutive verb forms. Now look at the wealth of information she's giving us with that little bit of detail. Certainly for those of us who are sociolinguistically inclined here, we can actually see her sitting there with Catherine Wilmont, her baby in her lap, paying attention to a host of linguistic details, sounds, pronunciations, the root forms of words, ideas about lexicalizing, all the time while her baby in her lap is getting attention from the very speaker she's eliciting data from. She's acutely aware of power differentials between her and her informants, concerns about documenting sounds correctly, thinking about how to write and represent her findings to different audiences. She speaks directly and directly, very directly, to the ethics of our researching enterprise. Bob Bailey and I have had several conversations about the ethics of parachuting into communities to get data, about the ethics of representation, ourselves and others in writing, and about the ethics of giving back. Munro addresses these head-on and makes them part of her intellectual endeavor. She weaves in details about the gathering of data to larger issues of the corpus she's putting together, to the grammars and dictionaries she and her students assemble. The human dimension is never far out of sight for Munro. Languages exist because people exist, and if we want our languages and our varieties to exist and be respected, well then our gaze needs to include the humans that produce the languages and varieties. This evening, Professor Munro will be speaking about the agreement and disagreement in Garifuna, an indigenous language of the Arawakan family spoken in Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. Please join me in welcoming this grand scholar to the stage.
Thank you so much, Faye. That was really lovely. I cannot tell you how honored I feel to be the Hale professor. So I said a little bit about Ken Hale. Those of you who did not know him, and I know that's true for probably most of the people in this room, missed experiencing a truly wonderful person and a great linguist, and as I mentioned, a great polyglot. I mean, he could sort of sit down with the language for 20 minutes and speak it fluently. I mean, I've seen things like this. I have so many incredible Ken Hale stories that I could tell you, but I won't. So his contributions were really outstanding, not least in terms of documentation and preservation. And my talk is primarily oriented toward language documentation and revitalization in the spirit of the United Nations Year of Indigenous Languages. And I'm going to present a very complex set of data, definitely messy, and tell you some of the conclusions I've reached about it, and then present some new aspects that await a fuller explanation. So let's go to Belize. This is looking out toward the Caribbean in St. White Village in the Sand Creek district of Belize. The house on the left, the larger of the two things on the left, is where one of my consultants lives, and I'll tell you which one it is when I show you some pictures in a minute. So Garifuna, that's actually how you pronounce it, which has been written about also under names like Central American Island Carib and Black Carib. People often refer to this language as Carib, but it isn't part of the Carib family. So as I mentioned, it's spoken in Central America and by quite a large U.S. diaspora community, and we are honored tonight to have a member of that community here with us, Mr. Tim Palacio. So you will see, while I'm going through my data and I'm not going to comment on it further, you will see things that you can recognize as loans from French, English, and Spanish. You probably won't recognize the things that are loans from the Carib language Karina. There are probably lots of loans that are from those languages that you won't recognize because they've been very heavily changed. So my research is based on long-term fieldwork with speakers in both Los Angeles and Belize. The principal speakers I've worked with are originally from St. White, where you saw the picture, and Punta Gorda, which is also in Belize. So I've written several articles on Garifuna. My main work I consider now is a 400-plus page co-authored manuscript, which has been used in ongoing revisions in 6 undergraduate classes at UCLA, co-taught with three of my Los Angeles Garifuna collaborators, and was told, is Peter Torres, are you still here? Yeah. How long ago was it that Peter took my class?
3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years ago, that's what I would say. So I also meet off and on with a group of Los Angeles speaker activists who are working on revitalization and preservation. And I should just say that I write Garifuna in a version of the standard orthography which has the added addition of vowel length and doesn't use the end tilde, which is a consonant that a lot of people write rather inconsistently. So these are my 5 main consultants. At the top you have Anita Martinez, and you have Martha Ciego, and Henrietta Augustine, who lives in St. Mike. First 2 live in LA, and they've taught this class with me. And then on the bottom, there's Vincent Lopez and Maurice Lopez, who I believe are not related to each other. Maurice lives in LA too, and he's also helping with the class. You had Maurice, right? And then in the footnote, I mentioned a whole bunch of other people who've helped too. So lots of languages, as I'm sure you know, have gender agreement. So in Spanish, a whole lot of things agree. Garifuna has oppositions comparable to all of these, plus many more, some quite unusual. For instance, relative to large-scale typological surveys like corpus gender. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of Garifuna gender and other agreement, and then I'm going to show you how these agreement systems follow different alignment typologies. And then I'm going to look at less difficult cases of agreement, possessor raising cases where there's no agreement and default agreement. This situation is further complicated in Garifuna by differences between neutral speech, which can be used by all speakers, and men's speech, which is an obsolescent form used on occasion by conservative older men, and some parts of it are used by most male speakers. So Garifuna distinguishes masculine and feminine gender in the 3rd person singular, not the plural, and so masculine, male and female animals have natural gender, but Taylor, who is sort of like the first linguist who ever worked in this language, and he published many, many articles, primarily in the 50s in IJAL. They are very dense and hard to read, but he has a lot of good material in there. He proposes semantic principles for determining the gender of an inanimate noun, but there's a lot of exceptions, and inanimate gender assignment is, I believe, best seen as arbitrary. So if you look at the examples in 1 on each line, I mean, lemon and lime is masculine, coconut is feminine, hat is masculine, dress is feminine, bottle is masculine, and box is feminine. You know, I don't think there's much you can say about really determining things. So I didn't really say much about the history of this language. This language, people have different stories about how Garifuna came to be. One story is that there were people taken from Africa who possibly spoke some Bantu language, anyway, or many different languages. And they were on a slave ship, and the slave ship was wrecked on an island in the Caribbean. And the people who were trapped in this boat escaped, or these boats, and ran up in the mountains where they were adopted by an Indian tribe there. And because they didn't all have a common language, they learned the language of these people. So racially, Garifuna people, as you saw in those pictures, most of them look black, but they speak a language which is primarily a typical American Indian language, in that it has very, very complex verb morphology. So it shows agreement for first person singular and plural, second person singular and plural, and third person masculine, feminine, and plural. That's 7 oppositions. That's really nothing compared with a language like Fijian, which we are studying in field methods, which has 15 different person number oppositions. If you can believe it, ask anybody in field methods class and they will be delighted to explain that to you. So there are many series of pronominal agreement markers. You're going to see just one set of prefixes, which are glossed P, but then I believe there are 5 sets of suffixes that are represented in my examples. The D set, the D plus set, don't ask, the N set, the S set, and the T set. And so I give you there a template for simple set structure. So you have a verb, and then you have an auxiliary following the verb. And then other stuff. So it's a VSO language. It's very strictly VSO. So there are 3 positions. You can have something in as a prefix on the verb, or a prefix on the auxiliary, or a suffix which could be on the verb, or if there's no auxiliary, it could be, I'm sorry, it could be on the auxiliary, or if there's no auxiliary, it could be on the verb. And we're going to see examples of all of those. So let's look at some. So verb phrases agree with subjects. So what I mean when I say agree is that the verb phrase, the verb plus the auxiliary, if there is one, is marked according to gender and other features of its subject. So agreement is shown here with a suffix in position C, that's at the very end, on the verb because there's no auxiliary here. So Griffin verbs have several different stems used in different environments. So here we see the basic stem, that's capital B. I'm not normally going to comment much about these stems. So these are intransitive sentences. And I'm going to try, I hope I did this consistently throughout, masculine affixes are marked in red, feminine affixes are marked in blue. I use purple for other person number affixes except for animate plural, which is green, but there aren't very many of them. So here's another way you can have subject agreement. Again, with intransitive, these are active futures. And here you can see that these active futures are marked with a prefix on the verb, and there is an auxiliary ba following it. You're going to see a lot about ba tonight. So this uses a different stem called the prefixable stem, but don't worry at all about stems. So I might notice that Griffin's order of verb before auxiliary is typologically extremely unexpected in a verb initial language. I do sometimes consider maybe the auxiliary should be treated as a clitic of some kind, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So verb phrases also agree with definite objects. So here you're seeing a verb followed by an auxiliary umu, which is glossed trop for a transitive. This is an auxiliary that's only used in non-future sentences, transitive sentences with definite objects that have no other marked aspect. So I don't know any other languages that have an auxiliary that means non-future with a definite object in a neutral aspect. This seems like a really strange auxiliary, but that's the way it goes. So Rob and Abby were students in my first grade in the field methods class. So the first A has a masculine subject and a feminine object. B has a feminine subject and a masculine object. So you can sort of see how it's working. And I will just mention that indefinite objects, I don't think you're going to see anything, don't agree. So indefinite sentences look more like intransitive sentences. So there's lots more agreement. And I'm not even going to read this whole list. You can read this list. I have examples of all of these at the end of my handout. If somebody really wants to see a demonstrative pronoun agreeing with this referent, I can show you. But trust me, this is true. So here's another picture of St. Mike. These are students in a class, I think it's a 6th grade class, but it might have been 5th, that was taught at the time by the granddaughter of Henrietta Augustine, who you saw a picture of a little while ago. And they are on the beach having some kind of science lesson. And they are all wearing their school uniforms, which are Griffin national dress. So Griffin dresses, and you'll see a little of this more later. Typically, women wear a gathered skirt, and then they have a top over it with a peplum. I'm sure there's some people in this class who know what a peplum is. If you don't worry. And most typically, these tops have puffed sleeves, but they don't have to have puffed sleeves. And the boys are wearing just sort of dark pants and white shirts, which are sort of a little less interesting. And I will also say, and you may see something of this later, that Griffin people really like plaid. So often Griffin ladies' dresses incorporate plaid somehow. And I've asked different people why, and one lady said it doesn't show the dirt as much, so that's a good reason for wearing plaid. Okay, so relative clauses. Definite non-future relative clauses are introduced with this demonstratives. The lay is the masculine one, the total is the feminine one. The agree is blue. That has masculine, so there's a masculine demonstrative. Now, what you might notice is toward the end of these relative clauses, there's a word "by" in the first one and "bon" in the second one. Those are forms of the auxiliary "ba" that we mentioned before. We saw "ba" before as a future marker, but it also occurs in WH extraction constructions. And in these non-future intransitive relative clauses, "ba" agrees with the subject. You're going to see many variations of this. So the "this" demonstrative in the relative clauses seems to be sort of a relative pronoun analog, I'm calling it here, agreeing with the relative clause "head," because that head can actually be modified or can have a different associated demonstrative. So that woman who danced, even though the relative pronoun analog is "this," following the word "mutu," which means person, but because it's used with feminine agreement markers, we know it means woman. It's followed by the "that" demonstrative, and that shows that I think that the "to" demonstrative is actually part of the relative clause. In non-future transitive relative clauses, the auxiliary "ba" shows agreement with the definite object. Actually, I have this laser pointer which I bought just for this. Now, my brand new laser pointer which worked. Here we go. Laser pointer. We'll forget about that. Maybe I'll try to get it later. Anyway, you can see the knee after "ba" there. It's a different agreement set of markers, but we have a knee because it's agreeing with the definite object "Rob." When the definite object in the relative clause is Abby, we have a feminine ending on "ba," and when it's the man who hit me, we have a first-person singular ending on "ba." Now we're going to look briefly at focus clefs. So you remember I said that these "ba" things occurred in WH extraction constructions. So we're going to look at, we looked at relative clauses, we're now going to look at focus. Same thing happens in WH questions, but we're not going to see them for a while anyway. So in the verb phrase of an intransitive non-future subject focus sentence, which is like a copular cleft sentence, "ba" shows agreement with the subject, so it was that man who danced. We have, after the form of "ba," we have a masculine marker. In a transitive non-future subject and object cleft, "ba" shows agreement with the object, so it was that man who hit Abby. We have feminine marking on "ba." It was Abby who that man hit. We have feminine marking on the object. So if Abby is the object of the relative clause, we have feminine marking. If Abby is the object, if Abby is clefted, she's still the object in the relative clause, so we again have feminine marking. Notice that the agreement series is different in each of these cases. So the first one has an N series marker, the second one has a D series marker. And WH questions, I could show you all these things, but I'm not going to right now. Okay, well, we're now going to get to the first really startlingly crazy thing that I'm going to show you. So the Garifuna word for if, agrees with an argument of the following clause. So if agrees with an intransitive subject. So if you look, you'll find it. We've got a second person singular "boo" suffix on the first word, I'm really surprised that doesn't work. Oh yeah, there it is, okay. But it's not very, okay. There, that's the second person singular subject of the "if you look" clause. But if the "if" clause is transitive, and again we have "boo." Here. Now you can see the "boo." I'm going to give up on that thing. But there, the "boo" is marking an object. You want to see if you can get this to work? Oh, you got it there. All right. There now it seems to be working better. So what do I do? Okay. Really? Yeah. Is it where? Oh, there we are. Okay, so Lou and Lou. First one, thank you so much, Peter. First one is intransitive subject. Second one is transitive object. So probably most of you have realized that if agreement is ergative. So the absolutive argument, the subject of an intransitive or the object of a transitive is marked on if. The ergative, the subject of the transitive, is marked with a prefix on the verb. So go back to number 12, you can see that there's a first person singular prefix on there. Okay. So here's another example of ergative agreement in the neutral non-future. This is the same kind of, the very first examples we saw were also neutral non-futures. So in the intransitive sentence, I understand, the word gunfaranda is followed by Tina, which is the T series first person singular suffix. And then if we have the sentence, you understand me, we're using that Munro transitive auxiliary again with the prefix for the you, the B prefix, and Tina again. So Tina in the first sentence is marking an intransitive subject. Tina in the second sentence is marking a transitive object. And we did see actually similar things with relative and focus clauses. And WH questions work the same way. They seem to be showing ergative agreement. But other Griffin constructions show accusative alignment. So for instance, in a hortative command, there's a nominative subject prefix on the auxiliary ah. This is a different auxiliary. In both transitives and intransitives. And then there's an accusative suffix in the transitive, look at me. Here's another accusative example. This is a complicated type of negative, which is expressed as a complement of ua, which is the verb meaning not exist. So these sentences mean something like, to say I don't understand, you're saying something like, my understanding or that I understand doesn't exist. So in other words, I don't understand. So what we are looking at here is in this complement clause, yes, here, we've got an N prefix on the auxiliary. But if I say I don't understand you, we've got again an N prefix on the auxiliary. So N is marking a subject in both cases, even though one is intransitive and one is transitive. And just to throw this back at you, we saw the same verb, the verb for understand, with ergative alignment in number 13 that we saw a while ago. I can go back and remind you. So this is ergative with the same verb that we see here in this construction with accusative alignment. So in 14 and 15, the last two we saw, the hortative command and the funny negative. We saw the ah auxiliary in constructions with accusative alignment, but ah can also show ergative alignment, for instance, in the perfect. So you have heard, in this case, the auxiliary criticizes to the verb, and we have the you suffix. Really not very good with this here. The you suffix there is marking a subject. But if I say, I have heard you, then the same suffix, the dibu, is marking the object. So dibu in both of these cases is absolutive, intransitive subject, transitive object. So this is an ergative case, but it's got the same auxiliary that we saw just a minute ago with accusative alignment, and in each case the suffixes on ah are different. You see what we deal with here and why I said you would be seeing messiness. Okay, so here's a case where in the same, I don't really want to say tense, but form, I don't think Griffin really has tense. You have been hearing me say future and non-future a lot. The main aspectual or tense opposition in this language is between future and non-future. So within futures, if the verb is active, it works on an accusative basis. So I will help intransitive, 17a, with an N prefix for the subject. I will help you, transitive, again with an N prefix for the subject. But if we have non-active or stative futures, again with our famous verb pluferanda, they work on an ergative basis. So I will understand. We've got the Dina, someplace there, the Dina ending on the auxiliary ba, the future auxiliary, marking an intransitive subject, but in the transitive case, ba has sort of changed its form, but it's still ba. And we have Dina marking a transitive object, so that's ergative. So I don't really have, I think this is really crazy, but it's wonderful, but it's crazy. So here we have accusative and ergative both in the same form. So here's another little intermission. This is a picture that was taken during a dance at a resort near St. Vite Village. This dance troupe, the girls there, the dance troupe was included the son of the lady that I was staying with at that time in her house. And these girls are wearing Griffin dress, although since it's all white, you can't really see all the details that I mentioned to you. And they're doing part of this dance. And Griffin music and dance and singing is just wonderful. If you go on YouTube and you search for Griffin singing or dancing or whatever, you will find lots of it, and it's really great. Some Garifuna songs are all in Garifuna. Sometimes they mix Garifuna and English or Spanish, depending on whether they're from Belize or Honduras. And it's just fantastic. The most famous Garifuna dance is called the Punta, P-U-N-T-A, and that's something that you can definitely search for online and see some wonderful music and dancing. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about gender agreement in impersonal constructions. So Garifuna has impersonal constructions that show agreement with no identifiable element of the sentence. And we might call these expletives. You'll see in a minute. Garifuna also has constructions that show agreement with an atypical, non-concrete subject or object, such as a clause. And in standard modern Garifuna neutral speech, and I'll tell you more about what neutral speech means in a minute, all of this agreement, the impersonal, the sort of atypical non-concrete agreement, and other types of agreement, it's all masculine, so that's sort of a default. So here are three cases of what I call oblique subject case sentences. So you can see that the first word in each case has a TI ending. That's a masculine singular ending. So to say Abby is smart, literally it looks like whatever Chuti means by itself with Abby, with instrumental with Abby. So you didn't see any prepositions before, but prepositions precede their overt independent object, but they have an agreeing prefix with that thing. So since Abby is feminine, we're seeing a T prefix on the ow instrumental. And, I can tell you a lot about these constructions, but Chuchi doesn't mean anything by itself having to do with smartness. It actually can mean he kisses, but I don't think that, I think it's a homophone. So it doesn't have anything to do with smartness. So this whole construction is the way you say Abby is smart, and I would say that, there's an expletive masculine singular which subject sort of comparable to English it or there. And the semantic subjects of these sentences which share some grammatical properties, what people sometimes call behavioral properties, with normal subjects appear as objects of instrumental, that's in 19, the expression for smart, dative, as in the lonely expression, we're using the dative preposition in 20, and benefactive prepositions, uagu can be benefactive or it can also mean on, and that's how you express tired. Okay, so let's talk about agreement in passives. Garifuna has normal agentless passives. So there's an example, Holly was hit. Holly was a student in another Garifuna Philbin's class who I believe has now graduated from law school. They've done wonderful things with her background in Garifuna. So there's a passive suffix on the verb hit, and it's got feminine agreement, agreeing with Holly. But in oblique passives, which is the name I'm using for things like Abby was met with or I was spoken to, where in English we can passivize the object of the preposition. In Garifuna they can't do that. So to say Abby was met with, Abby is there as an object of the commutative preposition uma, but the verb dungu with the passive suffix ua has a masculine subject suffix because there's nothing for it to agree with. It can't agree with Abby. So interestingly, although this looks very much like the oblique subject construction, in these oblique passives, the Abby doesn't have any subject properties, unlike the subjects of the oblique passives. She's just sort of there, not doing anything. Verbs can agree with causal objects or subjects. So I saw Abby's dancing, that's the part in brackets, and the object of the definite object of the verb see with the auxiliary umu is agreeing as a masculine object on the auxiliary. Abby's dancing is good, we've got the verb be good, and it has a T suffix because the subject of that clause, be good, is Abby's dancing. And object and subject complement clauses like this are treated as masculine. Words or phrases that are used metalinguistically as subjects or objects are also masculine. So if I say Abby was mentioned, Abby is the subject of this passive verb, just like when we said Holly was, whatever Holly was done. But if I say Abby was mentioned, and I'm not talking about the person Abby, I'm talking about this metalinguistic article, Abby. So for instance, Abby was mentioned as a name for the baby, maybe. Then we get masculine agreements. So when words or phrases are used, just as linguistic objects, they agree as masculine, not relative to what they refer to. And complementizers also agree with clauses. So Abby said that it was raining. The "it was raining" clause is there in brackets. And before that is the instrumental preposition, which you saw before, with a masculine prefix, because the complementizer is introducing a clause, and we know that clauses are masculine, so we have masculine agreement on the preposition. So there are other morphemes that look as though they might include masculine markers, and maybe they do, but we don't need to worry about this now. I mean, I decided you didn't need to be overwhelmed with that too, but there are mysterious L's and stuff floating around in the language that really look masculine. So we've seen a whole lot of separate elements of the sentence that show gender and other agreement, and many, many other things could have been cited. And Garifuna has a highly robust, I will say, gender system. When I talked about this with Brett Corbett, he agreed that it was too bad that he didn't know about Griffin when he wrote his book, Gender, because he agrees that this language is, right out there with lots of gender, including exotic items like complementizers. He does talk about complementizers, but I don't think he has any if agreement in his book, so that's kind of interesting. Okay, so now we're going to talk briefly about neutral and men's speech. So a number of basic vocabulary items are different for men's and neutral speech. And in this case, most men actually use the men's speech version. I'm going to be talking a little bit about things that most men don't do. But these are standard things. So the pronoun for I or me, the pronoun for you, singular, the word for yesterday, and the word for woman and man. So in addition to this word person that you saw before, which has its gender determined by how it's used in the sentence, they have actual words for man and woman, and they differ for neutral and men's speech. So usually neutral speech words are Arawakan, and men's speech words may derive from Carib. Remember I mentioned that this other language family, which was in contact with Garifuna a long time ago, lots of words were borrowed from that language. So female speakers only use neutral speech. Unless they are imitating men, or unless a linguist says, well, what do you think a man would say? So I get a lot of mileage out of that, but normally women don't use men's speech forms, like particularly they don't use these items. So I guess I could point out something that looks, that supports the Arawakan thing. So if you look at the words for I and me, if you look at the neutral speech versions, the word for I has an N prefix, which we've already seen is the first person singular prefix. The word for you has a B prefix, which we've already seen is the second person singular prefix. And so that makes those look as though they fit in with the language more than the men's speech versions, which are presumably Arawakan words. And I mean, they are. So these days, most men may use either form. They typically use those vocabulary items, but for the grammatical things I'm going to tell you about later, men in general use neutral speech forms. But young men typically, or even always, use only neutral speech. So the youngest male speaker that I've had the privilege of working with was 26 when I worked with him a few years ago. And I worked with him on 2 occasions for several hours, and I did not detect the slightest men's speech, anything in his speech. His grammar was extremely good. He wasn't really, got a lot of genders wrong. I don't want to say wrong, but I mean, he didn't use the standard genders for a lot of words. His grammar was really better than many people. All these very, very complicated constructions with relative clauses and clefs and stuff, he got them all perfect. So conservative male speech, which is the most sort of like elaborated form of men's speech, which was rare even when Taylor first described it in 1951. I mean, he said then that it was rare. People describe it as sounding macho, commanding, like a big shot. Those are all quotes that people have used for talking about men's speech and how it goes. So all speakers follow the system that we've already seen for ordinary concrete reference. So some semi-abstract or less concrete nouns may show gender variability for some male speakers. So for neutral speech, wayu means both sun and day. Some male speakers will treat wayu, when it means sun, they will treat it as masculine, but when they are saying day, which is a less concrete thing than sun, you can't touch a day, well, you can't touch the sun either, but you can see it, they would treat it as feminine. So you're going to be seeing more examples of this. In men's speech, and particularly in this conservative male speech variety, the grammatical marker of men's speech is that men will treat certain types of things which in neutral speech would be masculine, would show masculine agreement, they will treat them as feminine. And you're going to see a number of examples of this. So older male speakers still produce the conservative speech forms. Okay, so First, let's talk about impersonal agreement. So in conservative men's speech, expletive agreement is feminine, not masculine. So the first one is neutral speech. That says Zanira, who was the great-granddaughter of Vincent Lopez. Zanira is smart, but when I asked him how would you say that if you were talking like an older man, he's an older man, but normally he talks like a younger man, then he changed it. So notice that in 29A, the instrumental prefix on the instrumental preposition that you use with the word be smart is feminine because Zanira is a little girl. But we have T as the expletive on the verb. But in this type of male speech, you would get to on the verb. And I could have given you an example if we wanted to say some guy, like say Peter, I'm referring to you. If I wanted to say Peter is smart in neutral speech, if I substitute Peter for Zanira, the only difference in A would be that the preposition would be lao, not tau, with the masculine prefix. But in conservative male speech, the lao doesn't change because that's concrete. So concrete things in general, although you'll see one better example, don't change. But the T on the expletive T does change to a 2, even if the subject is masculine. So in conservative men's speech, feminine replaces masculine in oblique passives with words used metalinguistically for clauses as objects or subjects and in complementizers. So we saw all of those, and I'm not going to show you examples of them, just trust me. All the masculine agreement with the expletive subject of an oblique passive, with words used metalinguistically, that's like when you say the word, Abby was mentioned, for clauses as objects or subjects, and in complementizers, you always get feminine agreement in conservative men's speech. Okay, but now we're going to get to the weirdest thing, which I had the pleasure of discussing with Raoul the other day, and Raoul said he'd never heard of anything as outlandish as this. But Peter remembers it, I'm sure. So this is something I really don't understand how this comes about because it doesn't have anything to do with, non-concrete things. So in neutral speech, only animates trigger plural agreement. So this sentence means I saw the lemon for everybody. For neutral speech speakers, it also means I saw the lemons. So remember that plural agreement is only for animates. So lemons aren't animate. So whether they are referentially singular or plural, we still have singular masculine agreement on, object agreement on the umu auxiliary, which I know you're now totally familiar with. But in men's speech, and this one is done by lots of younger male speakers who don't do all the fancy stuff I just talked about. Inanimate masculine nouns may be treated as feminine to show plural agreement. So in men's speech, if you want to say I saw the lemons with an inanimate masculine noun, you can change the agreement to feminine, and that will tell people who are in the know that masculine object in fact is referentially plural. So this sentence doesn't mean anything. I mean, it would be, a speaker, if you asked a neutral speech speaker about this sentence, they would say that this has no meaning in neutral speech. But in men's speech, it means specifically, I saw the lemons, plural. And so it has to be an inanimate masculine noun that's referentially plural in men's speech. I mean, all those things have to be true, and then you can do this switch. And here I'm showing it to you with an object, but the same thing happens with subjects, with possessors, with objects of prepositions. So if you said, I talked about the lemons, lemon is masculine, so you would normally expect a masculine prefix on the preposition about, but we'll get a feminine one if you're a male speech speaker and you know that we're talking about lemons in the plural. So conservative men's speech is rare today and appears to have been uncommon even when Taylor first described it, as I said. But it's really quite fascinating to try to figure out why this speech variety transforms non-typical masculines into feminines. So Peter will probably remember that when I present this really weird thing in a class, I say, do you have any theories about why this could be? We did this in your class, I'm sure. And, people come up with all kinds of stuff. Like I've had people say, well, it shows, feminine empowerment. And, why would men's speech be doing feminine empowerment anyway? And I've had lots of things. People say, well, in German, the feminine article is also used for plural. And, that didn't really help me much either. But if any of you in the question period would like to suggest why this happens, I would love to hear your suggestions. So here's another intermission. This is a liturgical dance during a mass in Los Angeles, and you can see that these people are wearing, these girls are wearing Garifuna dress. Look at the sneakers, I love it. This is a mass. There are frequent Garifuna masses in LA, but the biggest one of the year is held on the Saturday before the 19th of November. The 19th of November is Garifuna Settlement Day. And they have it on Saturday because people can get off work and they can, get the church to let them do this on that day. And this is the Church of the Nativity in LA, where I've been to lots of these masses in LA. They used to sort of rotate them around different churches, but it's been this church for a long time. And the church is absolutely packed. At least half the ladies that are wearing Garifuna dress. It's just wonderful. And in the middle of the mass, they have dancing and singing and drumming. Processions, many, many processions. So if you're familiar with Catholic services, you know that there's an occasional procession in the Catholic Mass, but believe me, the Garifuna Settlement Day Mass has many processions, and then they have this liturgical dance in the middle, and it's just really wonderful. More atypical agreement. This is something that I discovered quite recently. Possessor raising in extraction constructions. I'm showing you this in relative clauses, focus, but it also happens in relative clauses. So 31A says, John's pants are dirty. So John is masculine. Juan is how you say John in Garifuna, and he's masculine. So the prefix on pants, egalisum, is masculine because John is the possessor of the pants. Pants, however, is a word that's feminine. So if we want to say John's pants are dirty, the verb be dirty has to have a feminine suffix. Anyway, you can see the two on Wea, which is the verb be dirty. So supposing I want to cleft John's pants and say it's John's pants that are dirty. Focus on John's pants. So once again we have egalisum long, and it's at the front of the sentence. And then we have Wea, the verb, and then we have one of these ba things with feminine suffix on it because the pants are feminine. It's John's pants that are dirty. But I can actually cleft John. And so John is at the front of the sentence. I've underlined the things that are the subject, the focus item. John, who is not a subject, is at the front of the sentence. And now he's followed by the verb be dirty and the ba thing. But notice that the ba thing now has masculine agreement because it's John that was raised out of this possessive phrase. And another sort of interesting thing, which we may get back to mentioning something about later, is the fact that, notice that in the C construction, there's no prefix on the possessed pants. Here's a sort of reverse example where I'm talking about Jane's hats. So Jane is feminine, but hats are masculine. So in the single sentence, 32A, masculine agreement on the verb be dirty. If we cleft the phrase Jane's hat, then we get masculine agreement on ba at the end of the sentence. But if we simply cleft Jane, Lana, then we get feminine agreement on ba. Oh dear, for some reason I copied something wrong. It isn't, I got pants there. It should be the word where it says, we don't know because I took this. Yes. This word should be ubunidi without a prefix here. So it should be hat, not pants. Now, here's an interesting fact. Garifuna has a few constructions with no agreement. So, for instance, non-future predicate nominals. So, l'escuela one, l'escuela means student, and the subject can be John or Jane or Belizen, which could be masculine, feminine, or plural. And in all these cases, there's no agreement on the predicate noun. Most of the cases that involve non-agreement, however, involve these extraction constructions. So following a verb or predicate, as we've seen, the ba auxiliary can do two things. So we first saw it marking future. We saw it marking a simple future, and then we saw some intransitive and transitive futures where we were showing both accusative and ergative agreement patterns for active and non-active futures. So that's one use of ba. The other use of ba in the same post-predicate position is a non-future extraction. It's focus, WH question, and relative clause. And the ba has identical morphological behavior. So in terms of morphological behavior, you saw one sentence where instead of ba, we had uba. And you get that in both of these kinds of construction, both in the futures and in the extractions. So Ecolona, who was a student of mine who wrote a master's thesis about ba, she wrote, although the data tempts one to seek a unified semantic account of the morpheme, there is no cohesive meaning that can be applied to satisfy a joint categorization. And this is sort of like why everybody worries about ba. In my first field methods class, there was a student who decided that ba should be called ba humbug, which was the best thing that I know. So then there's this guy, Harholm Larsen, who is a Danish linguist who wrote a dissertation at the University of Bern in Switzerland, working on Garifuna in Honduras, but it's pretty much the same. And I was on his committee, so I know his dissertation quite well. And he writes, there is likely a historical connection to be found between the future ba and the relative ba, but the exact path of grammaticalization remains obscure. And I think we all agree on that. The two uses of ba cannot co-occur. This is one of the reasons why I think really it's got to be the same ba. So if we say it's the woman who bathed with one of these clefts, non-future clefts, it's got agreement with the subject woman, marked on ba with bon. And on the other hand, if you say it's the woman who will bathe, ba there is immediately following the predicate, as it does in futures. And there's no ba following the verb within the relative part of the cleft. So the fact that they can't co-occur, you can't have the bon in 34b, you can't have a ba, obviously, since it's not future, in 34a. That is enough to convince me that really they are the same, but it's just a puzzle exactly what it's doing. So we've already seen many cases of ba in extraction constructions, but there are a number of such constructions, like 34b, where there's no agreement. So notice we have feminine agreement with the subject woman in 34a, but there's no feminine agreement to be seen in the future subject cleft 34b. So there's no subject agreement in non-future transitive subject extraction, and here you're going to see your one and only WH question. So it was Darlene's mother that saw me, that's the focus construction. Darlene's mother is feminine. There's no feminine agreement. Well, there's the possessor, Darlene, she's feminine too. The mother is the subject. There's no feminine agreement within the square brackets. We would expect a prefix on the verb see if there was going to be feminine agreement someplace, but there isn't. B is a WH question. Who or what? They use the same word for who and what. They had to make something simple in this language. Who or what scared your mother? So the verb scare, or cause to be scared, we would expect some kind of agreement with the subject who, and who can be interpreted as masculine, feminine, or plural, depending on various things, but certainly they can. But there's no agreement on the verb to cause to scare, to cause to be scared. And finally, in a relative clause, the man who understands Jenna, we've got the man, we've got the relative pronoun analog, this, masculine. So that agrees, but there's no subject agreement on gufaranda, the verb understand. We would expect a agreement marker on that, but we don't see one. So I have sort of speculated that this might be some kind of an aerial typological feature shared with Mayan. For those of you who know Mayan languages, Mayan has this pervasive construction in most Mayan languages called agent focus. And one of the things about agent focus is that it sort of deletes a subject marker. Norcliffe, 2009, who wrote a dissertation on this, she argues it's some kind of gapping. And the Mayan cases are actually quite startlingly similar to these Garifuna cases. Now, Garifuna hasn't been in Mesoamerica for all that long, but it's striking that it does actually share some typological features with Mayan, so who knows. So we saw this in 34b already. There's no agreement with the focused argument in future focused constructions. So it's me who will swim, no agreement of any kind with the swim verb. That's with an intransitive subject. It's Darlene's mother who will see me, no agreement with, oh dear, I have another typo here. So, I'm really not the person to be in B, you see the word Darlene? The bracket should start after Darlene and include Darlene. Darlene's mother is a two-word phrase, and ba and other clitics go after the first word of the phrase. So Darlene should be in both of these. I'm sorry, that's my mistake. And it's Darlene's mother who I will see with an object. We would expect some kind of object marking or something on the verb see, but we don't see it. Okay, another intermission. So let's see if this works. So Wanarwa, or what it is often called in English, John Canoe, and if you search Wikipedia for John Canoe, you can read a lot about this. Wikipedia, I think, says that it's only Caribbean, but I've seen something very similar, not with the drumming, but with the dancing, people dressed like this with these white-face Spanish conquistador kind of masks in Oaxaca. So it's clearly over a large area of Latin America. This is a very, very old dance that has something to do with the Spanish conquistadors. Since the Garifunas never encountered the Spanish conquistadors directly, I think they must have sort of learned this from other people. But this is to give you a little taste of Garifuna singing and drumming, which is wonderful. And at this event, there were a whole lot of people, like maybe 20 guys, ranging from little boys. This guy was not the youngest. up to full-grown men, all dressed in this same way, with a white shirt and the sort of crossed bandolier kind of thing, the black pants with rattles around your knees. Maybe I'll play this again just so you can see it a little bit. It's really great. Oh, no, it's not. And apparently kicking the drum is part of the deal because everybody did it. So you can see plan on this lady and this lady. This lady is pregnant. She's had her baby by now, but she's got a plaid yoke to her costume. And all these people are just wonderful. I mean, I was honored to be invited to this event. Default agreement is the third weird thing I'm going to talk about. So third-person intransitive, non-future focused subjects agree as expected, and I know that you all now have a total expectation that you're going to see, you know, a focus item, and then you're going to see some kind of thing that I'm putting in brackets here with ba after the verb with maybe some kind of agreement marking. So when we're clefting the man, we have masculine agreement marking on ba. When we're clefting the woman, focusing on the woman, we have feminine agreement marking on ba. This is again another word for person. When we're focusing people, then we have plural agreement, animate plural agreement on ba. However, with non-third person, non-future subject clefs, there's no agreement. Instead, the expected agreement is replaced by masculine singular. So let's look at singulars first, and this is in the way it would be said by a female speaker, Nuguya Abinahabai. So Abinahabai is the same thing we saw in 37A with a masculine. Now, what I have done is I've said to people, gee, you're feminine. Why wouldn't you use feminine agreement? Why do you use masculine agreement? And people say, oh, well, that's just the way we say it, which is, of course, what speakers will tell you. The dollar sign there in front of the ba with feminine agreement means that some people say, well, maybe that might be okay. But they don't volunteer it. Totally out would be if you had first-person singular agreement on ba, which, you know, you might expect that the subject sense is first-person singular. And similar kind of thing with second-person singular, it's you that danced. If you are talking to a woman, so again, you would expect that the you is feminine. Again, following Guguya, you have Abinahabli. Again, some people will say, well, if you said, oh, maybe it would be okay, but, I mean, some people say it's completely out, but some people will say it's okay. But Badibu with second person singular, no good at all. And non-third person plural show the same behavior exactly. I won't go through these, but first it's us that danced. And this is, you know, really surprising because it's plural and we're getting masculine singular agreement. And you guys, masculine singular agreement, same thing. And the same thing happens with non-future object clefts. So if the clefted or focused object is third person, then everything swings. So it's the man that I saw, masculine agreement on ba, marked in red. It's the woman that I saw, feminine agreement, marked in blue. It's the people that I saw, animate plural agreement, or agree with people. So that's all fine, but non-third persons don't work the same way. So I'm just showing you two of them. I'm showing you the I one and the you guys one. So the I said by a female speaker, again, just by you guys said by a female speaker, you guys, doesn't matter whether it's feminine or masculine, masculine agreement on ba. And once again, some people will say maybe you could say it with bayan, but most people don't like that, and nobody likes it with second person plural agreement. So A question we might ask is whether this default masculine singular by that we just saw in all of these default agreement cases, you know, talking to a woman talking, being plural, masculine singular for all of them, why? We might think that this masculine singular was like the other cases that we saw where masculine singular, if you're using men's speech or conservative men's speech, you might use feminine. So this is a hypothesis that made perfect sense to me, and every woman who I have talked about says, yes, I've heard men say that, and they would all say it with masculine agreement. But then I asked, I think 3 male speakers in LA. I didn't get a chance to ask anybody in Belize. I will do that next time I go down there. And they all said, oh no, you would never do that. But these people in LA are relatively young, so I don't know. It's an interesting question. So Stefan Harholm Larsen wrote about a different phenomenon. As everywhere else in Garifuna grammar, the default gender differs between the neutral and male speech registers. Now I know he talked briefly about this construction, but he wasn't talking about this construction where I got this quote. But since he said everywhere else, it may be that he knows that in fact male speech would use feminine agreement in these cases like 41A and B. So I should ask him about that. I kind of think it's very likely that somebody would do that, but the question is still open. So conclusions. Garifuna has a highly robust gender system which is reflected in agreement patterns throughout the grammar, and it's really a nice addition to the typology of gender and other agreement systems. And the men's and neutral social dialect variation in gender is, I think, very unusual typologically. And although many, many items in the sentence agree, there are still cases of non-agreement and default agreement, which maybe is also a case of non-agreement, the majority of which are seen in extraction constructions, focused WH questions, and relative clauses. I should say something I didn't say before about these default cases. My guess would be that the people who say, well, maybe you could say feminine here, or maybe you could say plural in the B sentence, I think that's some kind of reanalysis where people are thinking, gee, it doesn't make sense to say masculine, maybe I can say this other thing. This is so degraded for most speakers that I don't think it's like the older form or anything like that. I think the default agreement is, the standard grammar form. Anyway, so that's it. Sereme ni amu. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank my consultants, the other linguists who worked on this wonderful language, the UCLA Academic Senate and Linguistics Department for their support, and I especially want to thank my late mentor, Bill Bright, who suggested Garifuna as a language that I might work on a long, long time ago, and I'm so grateful to him, and former UCLA Vice Chancellor Claudia Mitchell-Kernan, who had worked anthropologically with Garifuna and introduced me to my first consultant. And I also want to thank Justin, because I couldn't have given this presentation without Justin's back. I don't have an adapter for my computer, so Justin has helped me with 2 presentations. So that's it.
There's this ton of conquistador maps in Guatemala. Maybe you know that, but Guatemala is just full of conquistador maps. So you don't have to go very far from Belize before you find a conquistador maps all over the place.
Oh, it's clearly a big cultural thing. I said that I thought probably the Griffiths had borrowed it because they weren't there when the conquistadors were. But, I worked in this tiny village in Oaxaca, and I went to the school ending program once many years ago, and one of the things they did was a dance that they called Munro, and they were wearing the same kind of masks and dressed in the same way. So clearly, it's not just grading, and it's great. No, I haven't been to the Caribbean areas of Guatemala. So,
All through the Maya Highlands.
yeah. Oh, I believe you. I absolutely believe you. Brian.
Thank you, ma'am. Very interesting talk. Lots of interesting data. On the matter of the switch gender between masculine and feminine, there are some languages, Albanian, for instance, and also some Romance languages, where there are nouns that are masculine in the singular and plural in the feminine. Masculine in the singular and feminine in the plural, and it has to do with the falling together of neuter, what were originally neuter gender with masculine and feminine, respectively. So I wonder if, I obviously have no idea what's going on in your language, but there are parallels to that have sort of historical explanations that can be recovered.
That's interesting. I don't think there's any evidence for anything like that. Most, if not all, Arawak languages have masculine and feminine gender, but nothing else. I don't think it could be something like that. Does anybody propose any particular reason why it would have gone in the direction you're saying?
Well, it has to do with the sound changes that went from.
So it's just, it happened.
Yeah, the neuter endings fell together with masculine in the singular and fell together with feminine in the plural.
So it's just happenstance.
Yeah, and one of the outcomes of that is that from a synchronic standpoint, feminine is the default gender in cases like with the gender of clausal subjects. It is the case that such and such. You find feminine gender there, but actually historically it's neuter and not feminine. Synchronically feminine, historically something else.
Okay.
Thank you, David Saskiewicz. So I'm not sure I completely caught everything, but I had a question. So there was
I'm sure there was
I had a question about what I'm about to ask. So was that the point at which you noted absence of agreement, I think, when the subject was extracted by various methods, and you mentioned possible aerial correlation with agent focus in mind.
Yeah.
So I want to make a remark, but then also ask a clarification question. It's the phenomenon of agreement becoming less or disappearing and the subject extraction, which gets all agent focus in mind. Probably sure you know this, right? Is actually sort of a cross-linguistically very common phenomenon, right? So this John Law called identified anti-agreement in Berber, where some or intermediate amounts or all of the agreement morphology disappears under subject extraction. So if that's the right picture, then it's also possible that mind isn't relevant, but it's just instantiating something that languages do. I think you had examples, I thought, where object extraction was also triggering disappearance of agreement. Was that right? Do you remember that?
Well, in this thing, it's not regular, but future focus, object is one of the things, the last one there, that doesn't show agreement. We'd expect feminine agreement somehow. But that's the main.
So otherwise, outside object focus, it's a subject expression phenomenon. This is relevant, I think, to a debate that's been raised by Nico Meyer in his Berkeley dissertation with the standards count of anti-agreement. Is this specifically about subjects, and he claims to have cases of object extraction as well. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. And other questions.
It certainly doesn't happen much with object extraction. I mean, it's, the place where we see it here is for any future focus. And it's just one of all the future focus cases, so there's nothing really special about objects, the C case.
Yes. So that raises the other question that I had. Is it possible that, given the discussion we had about the seeming to be two different meanings of Bob, but they can't co-occur, that the Bob of the future isn't really the future marker at all, but that there's a null modal, and what you're really seeing here is another subject extraction.
That certainly is, I think, a very promising line of, because I mean, I think it seems wrong to call it future, really, because this language isn't a language that has, I mean, any kind of tense or anything. It's just sort of a thing that appears in that case. But it's not just in extractions. I mean, I just will remind you that it's just in ordinary futures, too. So, for instance, here you're seeing active and non-active futures, and there's no extraction going on there. So, I mean, Bob really appears as the only thing that marks future in sort of ordinary clauses. There is another thing that marks future in certain types of embedded clauses. It's enclitic, but it doesn't occur in main clauses.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, my own feeling is that having something to do with extraction seems much more fruitful a thing to pursue, but then we have to somehow correlate it with the future meaning or future use, I should say. I certainly don't think it means future, but I mean, it's the other part of the future construction.
Harvey from UCD. I really enjoy the talk, although it's not my focus of study, but I just have a well guess. It's like, is it possible that the gender agreement carries with not only the grammatical information that is needed by the grammatical system, but also carries some kind of emotional implication or emotional information. For example, like when I hear the sentence like, it is me, that it is you, that for me, I always try to avoid this kind of saying because I feel it's too much straight and too strong. So in that case, masculine probably like show this kind of thing. And also, it's really
You're talking about the default agreement cases?
Yes, like for example, when you say like it is you, it is I, it's always masculine, right? So I just think maybe masculine kind of related to this kind of strong emotion you put people on the spot. And also in the conservative speech, tend to use feminine to replace masculine, because try to weaken this kind of strength. It's just my well guess, probably doesn't make sense.
I mean, sure, I think that seems like it ought to be an obvious hypothesis, but why would it be that the macho commanding people were trying to weaken their speech? I think possibly a better way to think about it is they are so macho and commanding that they remain macho and commanding even if they're using these feminine forms. But who knows? When you were talking about the first thing you said about the it is I and stuff like that. Senses like in 38. That's the ones you were talking about, I think.
Yes.
These are only. I don't know that you would get this in something as simple as it is me. It would be it's like it's me that danced or it's you that danced. So I'm not sure I completely understood your suggestion. I mean, you said that the masculine was sort of like real strong.
That's how I feel, because for me, I'm not a native speaker, but I really try to avoid this kind of usage because I think you really kind of put yourself or people, they put the other people on the spot. It's you that does. I'm not sure. And also, I don't know whether or not you will see this same kind of people use masculine gender agreement more often in imperative clause. I don't know if that's the case or not, because I guess if that's something really
Did you say it was imperative?
Imperative, like you kind of order people to do something, or you require
I
people
mean,
to do something.
I gave you a whole bunch of different sentence types, and they all use agreement. And You know, so we looked at commands, we looked at various types of futures, we looked at non-futures, we looked at that funny negative construction, and, you know, there's no particular association with agreement with any of them. I mean, they all show agreement. You know, until I started looking at this and thinking, gee, there are some cases that don't show agreement. You know, I was just overwhelmed with, you know, agreement everywhere. And, I mean, you guys didn't even see you saw a few cases of possessive and preposition agreement and stuff like this, but, I mean, there's agreement everywhere in this language. You can't get away from it. It's just amazing. And so, I'm not positive that I can understand exactly what you mean by emotional. You would sort of think that maybe, but this seems to be just a feature of the language.
Yeah, so, yeah, I understand that it's kind of very complicated phenomenon that may not be, like, you just feel that there may be lots of forces that give this picture. One force is definitely the grammatical system, and the other probably interpersonal, or kind of related to emotion, and evoking, you know, different kinds of thing that may result in this kind of complicated phenomenon.
I don't think I know any examples of anything that I would say relates to emotion. There is the case where you've got the men's and neutral speech, and clearly there might be some emotion attached to that. Raul had his hand up here.
Do we have time for questions?
One more short question.
One more short question. So I have one short question right here. And if you have questions, you can, of course, approach that after. Hello, I'm Daniel Krause from the University of Newcastle, Australia. Just something about the gender disagreement, some further thoughts. In modern standard Arabic, you actually get inanimate plurals that agree with the feminine. So if you want to say something like the beautiful books, you have the books in the animate plural, and beautiful is the feminine singular.
Nobody has told me about that. That's really interesting.
Okay, and in Proto-Indo-European, people have hypothesized that the feminine actually evolved from an old neuter,
That's what Brian was talking about.
Yeah, kind of like that, I think. I don't know if that has still some implications in Romance, so that, I mean, some people have thought about that. And a very short, tiny remark, because you said something about German, and I'm a speaker of German. I never perceived the feminine article as similar to the plural article, and also in other cases, like the non-nominative case.
Of course.
It's different.
I was giving
it's
you
just, yeah, I just want to
weird
see.
hypotheses presented by members of my class.
Right.
I'm not suggesting anything.
Thank you.
One point I will mention is that the cases that you talked about, I mean, you talked a little about Mayan, and then you mentioned Berber, and you just mentioned Arabic, and Garifuna too. These are all verb initial languages. There may be something going on there. I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much.